Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the inaugural event of this year's Small Wonders Short Story Festival. Before I introduce our speakers, I have a little housekeeping announcement. Just that you should take note of our... We've never ever had to do this use this, by the way, but just in case, please take note of our emergency exits, which are at the side over there, although there's also an exit where you all came in. But in case of any emergency, a member of staff will make some announcements and will guide you and will tell you what to do. But we're not anticipating any emergencies. But one emergency would be if your mobile phone rang during the readings. So could you please take a moment to switch those off, please? Okay, so the other thing I just wanted to say is that it seems, from my point of view, entirely fitting and extreme good fortune that we can start the first event of this Small Wonder Short Story Festival with two such admired and committed short story writers. Kevin Barry is the winner he's the winner of last year's. Well, actually, it's not last year, it's still this year. It's still this year, sorry. Is the winner of this year's very prestigious Sunday Times EFG Short Story Award. And I would also like to take a moment to say how grateful we are that EFG Private Bank, which supports the Sunday Times Short Story Award, has also chosen to support Small Wonder and specifically this event. So Kevin... Sorry, I find it very difficult to see here. Is there anything anyone can do with the lighting? You're going to... Sorry, what did you just do before? Because if I won't be able to read from here, yeah, that's better. I was going to say, if I can't read, the writer, that's perfect, because the writer, perfect, much better, because you wouldn't have been, that's it, okay. So Kevin... so I'm going to start again. He's the winner of this year's prestigious Sunday Times EFG Short Story Award for his debut collection. Kevin's debut collection, short story collection, There Are Little Kingdoms, won the Rooney Prize in 2007, not this year, and his first novel, City of Bahan, was shortlisted for the Costa Award. His short fiction has appeared widely on both sides of the Atlantic, in publications such as The New Yorker and the Granta Book of the Irish Short Story. In fact, aren't you in the throes of editing another book of Irish short stories?
A book of short stories for Faber for next
year. For Faber,
yeah.
That's what I thought. Yeah. So that was the Granta one, next year, a new collection for Faber. Kevin attributes the Irish short story gene to the weather. He has said that 300 days of rain a year are ideal conditions to make fabulous short storytellers. And he's proof of that. Kevin comes from County Sligo, by the way. His new collection of stories, Dark Lights the Island, employs his characteristic comic effects and sure ear for dialogue, but it employs that for serious and compassionate ends. Jackie Kay, and this is not her first visit to Small Wonder, we've been calculating whether it's her second or third backstage. Jackie Kay is one of our most versatile writers, but I think it's true to say that she has a special relationship with the short story form. She's also a poet, novelist and memorist, and is acclaimed for her work for both adults and children. Her novel, Trumpet, won the Guardian Fiction Prize. Her autobiography, Red Dust, a sort of partial autobiography anyway, won the 2011 Book of the Year at the Scottish Awards, and her poetry collections include the award-winning The Adoption Papers. Jackie currently teaches creative writing at Newcastle University. Her 3 short story collections are Why Don't You Stop Talking, Wish I Was Here, and recently Reallity, described in The Guardian as alive with her inimitable warmth, wit and wisdom. She's also written extensively about the form, recently saying, "You can carry the story around with you in your head, and if you put it down in a large field, it should still glow because of its intensity." So we're going to discover tonight whether the stories can glow and light up the barn. I'm delighted to hand over first to Kevin. He'll give a reading. He'll then hand over to Jackie. After that, they'll both be very glad to take some questions from you, the audience. Kevin Barrett.
Thank you very much, Diane. It's a great pleasure to read here and to be the first reader at this year's Short Wonder Festival, and it's a special pleasure to read with Jackie. And it's such an amazing place to read. I was saying to Di and Jackie as I was coming up the lane outside there, I thought, this is just fantastic. You know, I've never read anywhere with such a smell of shite in the air. And doesn't it really open the lungs, you know? What I'm going to do is I'm going to read a little from one story, and then I'll read a very, very short story in its entirety to finish off. Di mentioned the rainy conditions that I suffer and that all Irish writers suffer gladly. And this particular story I'm going to read a few pages from deals with this situation in a very, very important way. This story is set out in the fjord of Killery in County Galway in Ireland. And I should warn you in advance that they're an especially foul-mouthed race of people out around there. So don't shoot the messenger. I'm just recording this stuff. It's a story about a poet who gets tired of city life in Dublin and decides he's going to buy this old hotel and set himself up. And actually, after the story came out, I met an actual real-life Irish poet one day, a brilliant poet called Dennis O'Driscoll, and he said, "Kevin, I read that story about the poet. Yes, very good, impressive." I said, "Thank you very much." And I said, "Dennis, I had one qualm." I said, "Would a poet really have the wherewithal to buy a hotel?" And he said, "Don't underestimate us." Okay. So I'm going to read a few pages from the story, first of all, called Fjord of Killery. So I bought an old hotel out on the Fjord of Killery. It was set hard by the harbour wall, with Moelray Mountain across the water and disgracefully grey skies above. It rained 287 days of the year, and the locals were given to magnificent mood swings. The night in question, the rain was especially violent. It came down like handfuls of nails flung hard and fast by a seriously riled sky god. I was at this point 8 months in the place and about convinced it would be the death of me. "It's end of the fucking world stuff out there," I said. The chorus of locals in the hotel's lounge bar, as always, ignored me. I was a fretful blow-in by their mark and simply not cut out for tough, gnarly, West of Ireland living. They were listening instead to John Murphy, our alcoholic funeral director. "I'll bury anything that fucking moves," he said. "Bastard suicides tinkers," he said. "I couldn't give a fucking monkeys." Moelray is the most depressing mountain you've ever seen, by the way, and its gaunt, looming shape filled almost every view from the Water's Edge Hotel, the lounge bars included. The locals drank mostly Bushmills whiskey and Guinness stout, and they drank them to great excess. I wiped their slops from the counter with a bar cloth I had come to hate with a passion that verged on the insane. I said, "But seriously, that's one bastard of a high tide out there, no?" Barely the toss of a glance did I receive. The bar talk had shifted on to roads, mileage, and general directions. They made a geography of our country by the naming of pubs. "Do you know Madigan's and Maynooth?" "I do, of course." "You take a left there." "I have you now." The hotel had 23 bedrooms and it listed westward. You could set a can of peas on the floor of just about any bedroom and it would roll slowly in the direction of the gibbering Atlantic. The estate agent had gussied up the history of the place in the brochure. A traditional coaching inn, original beams, visited by Thackeray, heritage bleeding out the wazoo. And I had leapt at it. I was the last of the hopeless romantics. The bar talk moved on briefly from roads and directions. "If he's still around when her bandages come off," Bill Knott, the surveyor, said, "he's a braver man than I am." "Nice woman," John Murphy agreed, "as long as you don't put your hand in the cage." Behind the bar, the Guinness tap, the Smithwick's tap, the lager taps, the line of optics, the neatly stacked rows of glasses, and a high stool that sat by a wee slit window with a view across the water towards Whale Ray. The iodine tang of kelp hung in the air always, and it put me in mind cheerfully of embalming fluid. Bill Knott looked vaguely from his bushmills towards the water. "It's highish all right," he said, "but now what would we be talking about for Belmullet town, would you say, off a slow road?" The primary interest of these people's lives, it had seemed to me, was how far one place was from another and how long it might take to complete the journey, given the state of the roads. Bill had been in haulage as a young man and he considered himself expert. "I don't know, Bill," I said. "Would we say an hour and 20 if you weren't tail-backed out of Newport?" I said, "I really don't fucking well know, Bill. There are those who'd say you'll do it in the hour." He sipped delicately. "But you'd want to be grease-fucking lightning coming up out of westward direction, wouldn't you?" "We could be swimming it yet, Bill," I said. Now I had made, despite it all, a mild success of myself in life. But on turning 40 the previous year, I had sensed exhaustion rising up in me like rot. I found that to be alone with the work all day was increasingly difficult, and the city had become a jag on my nerves. The brochure about the hotel appeared in my life like a revelation. I clutched it in my hands for days on end. I grew feverish with the notion of a westward flight. I lay in bed even with the brochure as the throb of the city sounded outside, and I moaned as I read aloud, "Original beams. Traditional coaching inn. Thackeray, established 1648. The hotel had the promise of an ideal solution. I could distract myself from myself with its day-to-day running, its endless little errands, and perhaps late at night or very early in the morning, I would continue at some less intense level with my poetry. All of my friends, every last one of them said, "The Shining." But I was thinking the west of Ireland, the murmurous ocean, the rocky hills hard founded in a greenish light, the cleansing air, the little stoats peeping shyly from gaps in the dry stone walls. Yes, it would all do to make a new man of me. Of course, I hadn't counted on having to listen to my summer staff, a pack of energetic young Belarusians fucking each other at all angles of the clock. And the ocean turned out to gibber rather than murmur. Gibber, gibber, whoosh. Gibber, gibber, whoosh. Down the far end of the bar, Mick Harty, distributor of bull semen for our vicinity, was molesting his enormously fat wife, Vivian. "We're after a meal at the place run by the Dutch faggots," he said. "We had oysters for a starter, then we gone fucking bananas." Vivian slapped and roared at him as he stroked her massive haunches. She reddened and chortled as he twisted her around and pulled her vast rear side towards his crotch area. Nobody apart from myself paid a blind bit of attention to the spectacle. And even as she suffered this assault from her cackling husband, she turned to me and informed me precisely what they had paid for the meal at the Dutch couple's restaurant. "We had 2 starters, 2 mains, we shared a dessert, 2 bottles of wine, 2 cappuccinos," she said, as Mick grinded slowly behind, hoarsely yodeling an Alicia Keys love ballad. €136 even, not cheap, Queeveen. "Cappuccino is a breakfast drink," I said. "You're not supposed to drink it after a meal." I was not well liked out in Killary. I was considered superior. Of course I was fucking superior. I ate at least 5 portions of fruit and veg daily. I had omega-3 from oily fish coming out my ears. I limited myself strictly to 21 units of alcohol a week. I hadn't written 2 consecutive lines of a poem in 8 months flat. I was becoming versed instead in the strange, illicit practices of the hill country. And outside, the rain continued to hammer away at our dismal little world, and the sky had shucked the last of its evening grey to take on an intense purplish tone that was ominous, close in, biblical. Sky is weirding up, I said, like I don't know what. John Murphy grabbed my elbow as I passed along the bar. He was aggressive on the 3rd pint, always. And he said, I suppose you know that possessed she-devil above in the house is going to put me in the ground. John, I said, I really don't want to hear about it. I mean, literally, Queeveen, he said, she's going to fucking do for me. John, I said, your marriage is your own private business. She's poisoning me, he said. I can taste it off the fucking tea, Queeve. Would you go again, John? I indicated his empty stout glass. Oh, please, he said. They were all nut jobs. This is what it came down to. This is the thing that you learn about habitual country drinkers. Mick Harty, said Vivian Harty, is a man of 60, awed at the persistence of her husband's desire, and he'd still get up on a cracked plate. Just then, a cacophony erupted. From the hillsides everywhere come the aggravated howling of dogs. They were amped to an unnatural degree. The talk in the lounge bar stalled for a moment in puzzled response, but as abruptly it resumed. The tiramisu, Mick Harty said. You wouldn't know whether to eat it or smear it all over yourself. Nadia, one of my Belarusians, came through from the supper room and sullenly collected some glasses. The arse on that, John Murphy said. Oh, please, John, I said. Sexual harassment. 2 apples and a hanky, he said. I believe that all 9 of my staff were in sexual contact with one another. I housed them in the dreary, viewless rooms at the back of the hotel where I myself lived during what I will laughably describe as high season, and my sleepless nights were filled now with the sound of their rotating passions. Thank you, Nadia, I said. She scowled at me as she placed the glasses in the dishwasher. I was not allowed to forget I was paying minimum wage. The dogs had stopped, but the rain continued and was by now an hysterical downpour, with great sheets of water streaming down from Whale Ray, and the harbour roared in the fattening light. Visibility was reduced to 14 feet in front of our faces. This all signalled that the West of Ireland holiday season had begun. I'll leave that one there. Thank you very much. Now, a real shorty, and on a slightly more tender note. This is a story set in Cork City, and it describes a situation and a feeling that I think all of the girls and all of the boys in the audience will be familiar with at some level or other. It's a story called Across the Rooftops. Early one summer morning, I sat with her among the rooftops of the city, and the fat white clouds moved slowly above us. It was so early as to be a city lost in sleep, and she was really very near to me. My want for her was intense and long-standing, 3 months at least, an eternity, and I was close enough to see the opaque down of her bare arms, each strand curling like a comma at its tip, and the tiny scratched flecks of dark against the hazel of her eyes. She was just a stretch and a clasp away. The city beneath was lost to the peaceful empty moments of 5 a.m. It might be a perfect Saturday of July. All I had to do was make the move. Nor was it my imagination that her shoulder inclined just slightly towards me. There was a dip in the way she held it, the shoulder bare also beneath the strap of her vest top. The shoulder's dip must signal an opening. No, I don't want to sound painfully cool here, I said. I believe you, she said. But you may be looking at the man who introduced Detroit techno to the savages of Cork City. No, we talked about the music, and the clothes, and the pills, and the hours we had spent together, the nightclub, and then the party at the flat that was rented by friends, all of whom were panned out inside now, asleep or halfways there. And we had climbed onto the rooftop to smoke a joint and see the day come true. Every line had the dry, inflected drag of irony. Feeling was unmentionable. We talked about everything except the space between us. I sat on my hands. I thought about maybe kissing her shoulder. How would that be for a move? It would be the work of 2 seconds, a lean-to, a planting of the lips, a withdrawal, and a shy little glance to follow. I should maybe think about going, she said. I really needed to make the move. Don't yet, I said. The pool of silence that was the city beneath us was broken but infrequently. A scratch of car noise from a cab rank, the tiny bark of a dog from high in the estate somewhere very distant, the sound of the traffic lights turning on the corner of Washington Street and Grand Parade. Across the way the church and its steeple, the grey of old devotion, the greened brass of its dome. I turned towards her, and I looked at her directly, and her eyes braved me to make the move. So, any plans for Saturday, I said. I read again the disappointment in her. She was urging me on, but onwards I could not make ground. Depends, she said. Her shoulder dipped a fraction again. Now was the moment. I sat on my hands and looked out across the rooftops and saw nothing, registered nothing but the hard, quickening beat of my heart. So, how's it you know Cecile again, I said. She sighed and explained the connection. It was through the university. They had shared a place on French's Quay as first years. And how do you know Cecile? She said it in an exaggeratedly bored way, an automated drone, the words running into each other, a mockery of me. The flat high on Washington Street was Cecile's. Cecile had in her bedroom loudly been screwing some boy for most of the night. Cecile had no trouble ever making the moves. Cecile's had a good night anyway, I said. Yeah, she said. Maybe I should just ask, I thought. Can I kiss you? How would that sound? A gull descended to the lip of the church's roof. Across the breadth of the street, the mad stare of its eye was vivid and comical and a taunt to me. I allowed my left hand to emerge from beneath my buttock, and I let it travel the space between us, along the cool stone of the roof's ledge, and I placed my fingers lightly on hers. No response. I listened for a change in her breathing. Nothing. She was still even and steady, and I turned to look at her, and blithely still she looked out across the rooftops. She did not incline her head towards me, and she did not speak at all. I drew back my fingers, but only by an inch or two. I looked to see if she would withdraw her hand to a safer distance, but she did not. She breathed evenly. Hard rasps of jungle panic ripped up my chest inside. I thought, what's the worst that can happen here? The worst that can happen is I lurch and she recoils. So much worse not to try. So all I have to do now, I said, is make the move. Oh, Jesus Christ, she said. What? You're killing this stone dead, she said. But she did not get up from the ledge. She did not leave my side. She allowed the silence to swell and fill out again. And now birdsong taunted from the direction of Bishop Lucy Park. What if I left it to her to make the move? Procreation would end and the world would stop spinning. The birdsong rose up now and strung its notes along the rooftops and linked them in a jagged line. The rise and fall of the steeples and chimneys was as though a musical notation. There was dead quiet from the flat inside. The last awake, we had the morning to ourselves. I really like you, I said. Okay, she said. I mean really, really. Very hard to put the words out, but they were on the air and at their work now. I turned to look at her, and she turned but to look away. I saw that a flush had risen to her cheek, the perfect knit of her collarbone as it turned, and flawless brown from a good June the smooth curve of the shoulder, like rounded stone made smooth by water. It was as if my words had just flown up into the white sky above and imploded there, as if an answer was not needed. Okay, I said. This meant everything. All of summer would be coloured by this. She did not seem to breathe then. I kept my eyes fixed on her as she looked anywhere but at me, and I counted the seconds away as she did not turn to face me. In my evil dreams, I had seen myself approach her with lascivious intent, with a cold, thin, cruel, sexual mouth just parted slight ways, and I went deep then to find a way to make this suave magic come real. Still, something in her presence unmanned me. Perhaps it was the sense that I was aiming too high. She was really quite beautiful. "Turn to me," I said. She laughed, but it was only a tiny laugh, and it had the trace of shock in it. I was forceful now out of nowhere. And she turned to me. I leaned in without pause. I did not allow the words to jumble up in my head and forbid me, and I placed my lips on hers. She responded well enough. The opening of the lips was made, our jawbones worked slowly and devoutly, but we did not ascend to the heavens. The kiss did not take. After I don't know how long, maybe half a minute, maybe a little more, she placed very lightly on my chest the tips of her fingers, and the tiny pressure she applied there told me it was over, already. The pressure was of a fuse that fed directly from her heart. Gently so with her fingertips, she pushed me back to break the kiss. She turned quickly to look away. I turned as quickly to look in the opposite direction. My heart opened and took in every black poison the morning could offer. Midsummer. Slant of the sun coming through the white clouded sky then, and the church across the way drew its own shade over half of Washington Street. A fat pigeon flew beneath the eave of the church, and only the heavy beat of its wings on the air broke the dark spell that had formed about us. I turned to look at her, and she responded with a half smile, half sorrowful. She placed her palms face down on the ledge and pushed herself to a stand, languid, her movement, to let me know what I was missing. "I'm going to go," she said. I nodded as coolly as I could. That I could muster even the tiniest measure of cool was credit to my resilience. I was resilient as the small medieval city beneath. Throw a siege upon me and I will withstand it. She crawled through the Velux window to the flat inside, and I heard after a few moments the turn and click on the flat's door, and then her footsteps on the stair. With her steps fading, the summer went, even as the sun came higher across the rooftops and warmed the stone ledge and the slates, and I looked out across the still, quiet city, and I sat there for hours, and for months, and for years. I sat there until all that had been about us had faded again to nothing, until the sound of the crowd died and the music had ended, and we all trailed home along the sleeping streets with youth packed away and life about to begin. Thank you. Thanks.
Wow, that was wonderful. Really great. I was just enjoying being read to in this place. It's all cosy. And now I've got to get up and do it myself. Doesn't seem right somehow. I'm going to read you a little bit from 3 different stories. It really is a great pleasure to be back in Charleston, and thank you for having me. Such a wonderful place. And I love the smell of shite. Fantastic. But anyway, it's really great to be back at Small Wonder. And so I'm going to read a little tapas. I thought I'd give you a little tapas of 3 different stories, a little taste of 3 very different stories, and see how I get on. So this first one is called Mini Me. And it's a great pleasure to read with Kevin, because we've never been on the stage together. So, but in a moment, we'll seem like we've known each other all our lives, and you'll say, "Oh, really? Is that the first time you've met?" And we're both wearing scarves. That helps. Although we didn't consult each other whether to wear the scarf or not, did we?
There will be dance steps.
There definitely.
Jazz hands.
So this is Mini Me, and the only thing you need to know about this character is that she's 18 stone. so you have to make me a bit bigger. It's the only way to feel slim these days. Mini-me, day 1. See, every time I go on a diet, I remember all the diets that I've gone afore. Like all the illnesses, they come with memories of intense sadness. This time it's going to work. I'm telling you why. It's working because my dedication is up there, optimum, second to none. I've tested myself, and my answers are all, aye. I'm all across it. I tried not to get too down this morning when I got out the old exercise bra for the previous diet and was shocked to find my knockers didn't fit into it. So first up, and as a matter of urgency, I had to heave myself to the sports shop. I says to the girl, you should be ashamed of yourself. You're supposed to be supporting people to get healthy, and there you are discriminating. No support for over 36 DD. And I says, it's a scandal. The girl looks at me like she despises me when she doesn't even know me, and she's saying on repeat, no, my problem, no, my problem. And I says, what's the matter with you? Are you on a low vocab diet? And she clamps her mouth shut, folds her arms and just stares, cool as you like, cool as the bloody cucumbers I'm having to masticate. So I just had to leave the sporty shop, waddle out with as much dignity as I could muster. I hears her shout after me, sort your head out, weirdo. But I resisted the urge to go back and have it out with her. I've more to worry me than ratty lassies in retail therapy. Next up, I tries Marks for support and finds a nice woman who has a whiffle les about her and appears to enjoy taking my measurements. I leaves Marks at 2 with the bra in my bag, black and stretchy. It won't be too long till I get back into the old sports bra. This one's a wee go-between. But then my tummy rumbles. Shopping is pure knackering. I'm no meaning to be funny, but even going up the escalator tires me out. I have to hit that first step hopping. I'm going to have to start this diet tomorrow. I'm pure starving now, what with having to go in search of a boulder holder, and all I had for breakfast was a pink grapefruit, which has not exactly put a lining in my stomach. It felt more like it took the lining off my stomach. They say that coffee and tea are negative waters. Well, the grapefruit is a negative fruit. So I goes and has myself a cafe latte. The skim milk is more fattening if you're on a diet, so I believe this is a conundrum, and an almond croissant. They don't even pretend to have skinny almond croissants, though they do have skinny muffins. I mean, please. You might as well stick some blueberries into an empty egg carton and hae done with it. Day 1. I didn't bother recording my intimate thoughts for you the rest of yesterday. I reckoned it couldn't count as a dieting day. But today is Tuesday, and first things first, the scales. I'm now heavier than I was yesterday morning due to the croissants, the Big Mac, which I boycotted for ages because my surname's McDonald, the spag bowl, the deep-fried Mars bar, the Chinese carry-out, the bumper bag of crisps. I was a bit sickened. I've got to the stage where I look at myself in the mirror and say, how did you let yourself go? But I can't be hanging around asking existential questions. Is the self something that can be let go? And if so, can you still be standing? Got to keep up the momentum and be true to my vision when I started this brand new diet. I could see myself slim. That's what I have to do when I'm trying to shed shitload of stones. I have to carry a mini me inside my mind's eye, a wee me. I give myself the figure of Michelle Obama. To look like her, I have to give myself some extra inches in height. It's doable. Getting fit makes you taller too. I have to believe she's possible, this mini-me, like I've got something invested in her materialising. And before she's even here, what you have to say is, this is it this time. You're going to hang on to her. You're not going to let her go, right? It's no getting the weight down that's a problem. It's the third woman that comes along when you've reached your goal, trying to reach havoc. It's the third woman I'm ready for when she saunters up and just starts adding things, slowly, creepily, a wee scone here, a wee tatty there, a wee tatty scone, a toty knob of butter. I'm keeping an eye out for her. Aye, diets are more like bereavements. What happens to me when I shed a shitload of stones is that I feel sad for the old fat girl who used to stare sadly into the mirror, trying to do something with herself. Truth is, I'm a bit of an alien when I'm skinny. I don't recognise myself. Suddenly old, suddenly miserable looking. At least I look happy, fat. At least you can still look young when you're overweight, a wee bit of a cherub in your cheeks. So that's the other thing this time. I'm going to have a wee ceremony for the old fat me, just like I would if I died. And this time I'm going to bag up our clays and put some into Oxfam, some into Red Cross, and some into elderly care. So I really, truly am spreading myself thin. The fat clays are all like funeral clays anyway, all black. But I'm not there yet. I'm on day 1, which should really be day 2, but I'm not going to judge. That's the other thing. Get rid of the judgmental voice inside your own head. This time, all the clothes are going the minute they're loose. I'm getting well rid. It's all about loss. Everything's all about loss. The time before the last time when I actually joined Weight Watchers, I used to quite look forward to the weigh-in. Aye, if Sandra said, "Good news, Patricia, you've lost 4 pounds," it was better than a night out at the bingo. But Weight Watchers is no the answer. They say things like, "Good news, this week you can have a bowl of Cocoa Pops." I mean, come on. You're supposed to wet yourself with excitement. The wow factor in a bowl of Cocoa Pops. Come on. Back to the clays. I'm never again going to sneakily keep them in a suitcase under the bed for the return of the big lassie. No way. Nor am I going back round to the charity shops, hunting around for my old clays, telling myself I'm double donating to console. That doesn't work either. It doesn't work, and it reduces morale. That's what the dieter needs more than anything, morale. It's a hard thing to nail on day 1. I'm telling you, your self-esteem is shot to pieces, and who are you going to blame? All the snooty-nosed people that look down at you, sneakily eyeing up your midriff. All the people that talk to you like you're stupid when you're no stupid, like your brain's slow because your walk's slow. All the skinny judgmentals. They're the disturbed ones. Tell you why. Because they can't take their eyes off my fat arse, that's why. I'll finish that one there. Thank you. And this is a completely different tone. This character is 89. And yes, I'll just read her. It's called "These Are Not My Clothes." There's a lot of characters in this book that are old people in one way, of one sex or another. I suppose I quite like creating older characters, possibly because they're quite under the radar in fiction. You don't come across that many really interesting old characters, and also maybe because my grandmother lived to be quite old enough to add the half years, 91 and a half, jockey, she'd say. And she was a fascinating person, and she had an incredible line and expressions, like when Ian McEwan got shortlisted for the Booker for the second time, she said, "Ah, weel, jockey, the fat sow's arse is always greased." I didn't know quite what that meant, but I've never been able to look at Ian McEwan's bottom in quite the same way ever since. "These are not my clothes," I tell her. "These are not my clothes." But she puts them on me anyway. She says, "Lift your arms, that's it, over your head, there now, all fresh," as if I were a bloody baby. "Everything belongs to everybody here," she says. "What's it matter? These are not my clothes." I repeat. "I heard you the first time," she says. Then she takes me to the window and parks me. "Bit of a wind today," she says, "a good drying day." I sit and look out. What I see are the trees waving as if they're asking for help, or as if they're saying, "We surrender." There's an empty wooden table in the garden with a red umbrella down and not up in the middle because there's no sunshine. And there's a blue pot with some flowers I used to know the name of, but I've forgotten. So I'll call them forgotten flowers. There are forgotten flowers in the blue pot. And a bench. Nobody's sitting on it. The bench is staring straight ahead, as if it's watching something, maybe a match. There's a huge high hedge, I think, or it could be a stone wall with things growing through it. It is difficult to decipher things, where things begin to grow. Further ahead, I see white and purple and yellow small flowers with a common name that I've just remembered. Crocuses, crocuses, crocuses. Round the crocuses is a small wall a brick high. In the midst of the long lawn and not far from the table, there is an apple tree, I think, but no apples and no apple blossom. At the bottom of the long garden and through the trees, I can see another house in the distance faintly, just a little red brick through the trees. And over to my left and above the high hedge, I can see a slate roof and a cream chimney. And if I try and turn and peer around the corner, more to my left, moving slightly out of my chair, I can see the tree that cries, the one we used to call the weeping willow. I can see a bit of the weeping willow, but not all of it, because I can't crane round far enough, and that is the view from my window. Yesterday, when she got me from the same place at the window, she said, "You're lucky, we've got nice views here." I don't have my watch anymore because they've taken it. At lunch the other day, I saw Hannah wearing my watch, and when I said, "Hannah, I think someone's given you my watch," Hannah said very crossly, "This is my watch." I went to argue with her, and then felt as if something was clapping my mouth shut with such force that I didn't speak at all for the rest of the day. Life is too short to argue about time. Today she comes for me, and I assume it must be the same time as yesterday when she came for me. "Worked up an appetite, have you?" she says. "I hope you're not going to be wasting your food today. Think of the children in the famine." When she speaks, she shouts and clearly enunciates as if I were a dummy. She pushes me to the big oval table where all the women and men are seated already, and she ties a bib round my neck to protect the blouse and cardigan that are not my clothes. "These are not my clothes," I say to her again, and she says, "Change the record, why don't you?" And she pinches my arm quite hard. The soup is red, and the spoon next to the soup is round. The spoon is not square, because you couldn't fit a square spoon into a round mouth. The soup is red because it couldn't be blue, but yesterday it was yellow. You can get yellow soup and green soup, you know, but you can't really get black or blue soup, unless you had a soup made of squid ink, but I doubt that would be very nice. The matron in her blue and white uniform, mainly white, but with a blue and white stripe near the wide neck, says grace, and we must all hang our heads. For some of us, the hanging of heads is the usual position anyway, and there's no effort at all involved in saying grace. "For what we are about to eat, may the Lord make us truly thankful," the matron says in a crisp voice, as crisp as that lettuce, whose name I've forgotten. The matron then raises her head and looks over at me. I haven't hung my head, and she's looking straight ahead. "Amen," she says, and stares at me. "Amen," I say, and stare back at her. I lift the spoon to my mouth and then put it back again to the bowl. I lift it again and put it back to the bowl. I move the soup around a plate so that it looks disturbed. It looks like somebody has done something with it, so that the matron will not notice that it is undisturbed. None of us talks to each other because nobody now has anything to say. It seems they've taken all the conversation from us. Sometimes when someone's new here, they'll make a bit of an effort and say something like, "I used to enjoy watching the snooker, you know," or "I used to write to my daughter in Ontario once a month," or "I used to be very good at making short crust pastry," or "I used to go to the baths once a week on a Thursday while my wife was at the hairdresser's," or "I was very involved in politics, you know." Sometimes a new arrival will say something like that, as if trying to remember who you once were helped. But what I've discovered is that it doesn't help what you used to do or who you used to be. It doesn't help. Not one jot. Not one jot. I'll stop that story there because it gets too sad to read more of. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'll finish your tapas with another story called Bread Bin. I've only read this story a couple of times. I read from the story a couple of times. And the very first time I read it, it was at the York Lesbian Arts Festival, and it was my mum's 76th birthday, and she was with me. And when she got back to Glasgow, she said to her neighbour, who lives across the road and has lived in the same house as her, in the same house across the road for 50 years, so they've been friends for a long time, and this neighbour is slightly homophobic, and she said to her, "Isabel, 1,500 lesbians sang me happy birthday," she said. And she said, "Top that, Isabel." Isabel looked like she didn't want to top it, not in a million years. Anyway, so this features another grandmother, a slightly different grandmother in this story, Bread Bin. "It's taken me until the age of 49 to have really wonderful sex. I think that's not bad. Some people don't experience good sex until they're 60. I often see secretly smiling 60-year-olds when I'm out and about. Then again, some people never have it at all. My grandmother told me she'd never had an orgasm. She would discuss sex with a frankness that surprised and embarrassed my mother. Maggie, her good pal, had described an orgasm to her. Maggie says it's a kind of a spasm. A great spasm that shakes and shakes the core of you till you're good for nothing. Like a tree in a wild winter storm, a good orgasm could actually uproot you, Maggie had told my grandmother. That was why she left her husband of 40 years and ran off with a woman. A womanly woman, actually, my grandmother said, with more than a hint of wistfulness. The first orgasm of Maggie's entire life uprooted her. She lives down south now. Oh, what a shame, I said, delighted. My grandmother nodded, sipping her tea, a little sorry for herself. Then she snapped out of it. It's not one of my biggest regrets, never having an orgasm, if you're good for nothing afterwards, she said, sensibly. Most of her life, she said, her proud neck shaking a little for double emphasis, she was good for something. Even my bread bin was clean, she said, half angrily, like some woman had got away with having dirty bread bins. Even the washing in my line was colour-coordinated. Indignant now, like other women had got away with mixing up colours in the line. I tried to look admiring. I was in my early 40s when we had that conversation and was beginning to think I'd never find it either. What's all the fuss about, I'd say to pals out in similar situations for consoling meals in romantic restaurants surrounded by 60-year-olds in love. Am I missing something? For every lover I've ever had, there's been one small, defining sexual moment. There was Angie. We were 17. I was riding my Honda 50 to her tenement flat in Springburn, Glasgow. A Honda 50 is not maybe as sexy as a Harley Davidson, but it felt pretty damn sexy to me at the time. I was wearing a yellow helmet, dark jeans and a leather jacket. Angie lived on the 4th floor. I ran up the stairs with my helmet still bobbing on my head. Something told me she might fancy me if I arrived wearing it. I was breathing fast through the hole in my helmet. My head felt hot underneath. I didn't know if my feelings for her were right or wrong. All I knew was that they gave me a tight, secret feeling when I was astride my Honda 50. I'm going to skip that bit. It gets a bit steamy and rush on to a few lovers by. The next lover was Sally. She was an incredibly quiet person. She hardly spoke. I spent all my time trying to draw her out, open her up. She was so shy, she tied herself up in knots. She'd start a sentence and then get shy of her own sentence and turn back. It was like she was always looking for some brackets to hug her. I feel like, Sally would say, and I'd say, yes. And she'd say, never mind. I think I'm feeling, Sally would say, and I'd say, yes. And she'd say, nothing. Till one day I said to her, you're such a tease. And she blushed and she said, oh, no, I'm not a tease. And she pulled me towards her and kissed me, thrusting her tongue right into my mouth. But then, when I got into bed with her, I was so surprised. Sally made so much noise having sex, so much noise for such a quiet woman. She almost blasted me out of the bed. I nearly jumped out of my skin when she screamed that first time. I thought something was terribly wrong, that I'd hurt her. After a bit, I realised that she was letting all the noise out, the noise she couldn't make outside of the bedroom. Jump a bit more again, sorry. Don't know what I'm doing to myself reading this story in Charleston. It's just because my old friend Debbie has come. I began to think my grandmother was right, that she hadn't missed all that much. The lovers I had either seemed to run away with their orgasms as if they were secret nuts to nibble on someplace far from me, or they shrieked the place down, making elaborate and excruciating expressions on their faces, slapping the bed and slapping me and frightening the hell out of me. Those ones made me feel like I was trapped in some sort of Edinburgh Fringe performance show. Then, just when I'd nearly given up, I met her, Martha. We were sitting opposite each other on a train. We chatted for quite a while and I fell asleep for a little dreamlike time. When I woke up, Martha smiled at me. There was something in the way she smiled at me, a kind of openness. I just knew then, that I'd wake up to many more times of Martha smiling at me. We courted for a long time, months, drinks, dinners, chats, emails, texts. And then one night she was round at mine and the thing happened to me. It went all the way through me. It sped back to my birth and hurtled towards my death. It went through me like a train, like a boat upturning, like a tree in a wild storm. A couple of days later, I phoned my 85-year-old grandmother to say that her pal Maggie had not been exaggerating. "I've got a new woman in my life, Gran," I shouted down the phone. She was very hard of hearing. "Good," she said, "good. But has she got a clean bread bin?"
Thank you for two superb and very, very entertaining readings as well. Have we got a roving mic? Is there a roving mic? Yeah,
Bang on time, we're both bang on
if
time.
anybody would like to ask a question, could you please raise your hand and come on? Okay.
Here's one.
Over here, please. Would you mind standing up as well so that everybody can? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. Is it working? Yes. Thank you both. It was just terrific hearing both of the readings. Jackie, I wanted to ask you, as an educator, one of the most thrilling things is to find material that's innovative and poignant and truthful. And I first came across your work in a social science course, an introductory social science course in the Open University. And I wondered if you could would you mind reflecting on the point at which you realized that your material was being used for educators, for education, and how that made you feel?
Oh gosh, that's quite a hard question. I don't know when I don't know quite when I realised. I remember going into school once, and I'd forgotten my own copy of my book, so I had to borrow the teacher's book. That was quite a funny experience because there was all these wee notes down the side, which is a bit like reading gossip about yourself. It's kind of fascinating, you know. You just wanted to stand and read the wee notes down the side, and I came to one that said, "Punctuation seems all wrong." So I read that out to the class, to the huge embarrassment of the teacher. But I like, you know, finding any readers, whether they're using the work to study the work or whether they're using the work to read on their own. And I suppose the adoption papers, I got enormous amount of letters. That my first book, I had a lot of letters from social workers and people in the adoption field, as well as kind of birth mothers and adoptive mothers and other adopted people. And then I found that there was a whole load of people. I mean, hundreds of people really that are involved in the issue of adoption in one way or another, and so I find that interesting as a social science subject. But I don't necessarily think, you know, when people ask you how to whether you mind your work being analysed or used in different ways, then I really my answer is that I really don't mind, because I wouldn't want to limit the ways in which my work was read. But I do say that there isn't such a thing as, you know, as a right answer. Like a sixth former once said to me about a poem, "Dance of the Cherry Blossom." She said, "I've noticed you use cherry blossom a lot in your work. Is this to do with the Japanese sign of regeneration?" And I said, "No, it's the only tree I know the name of." She looked a bit disappointed. What about you? Do you mind if...
Yeah, I was actually at a conference in Montreal recently of Irish studies, and there were Irish studies scholars from everywhere on the planet, Japanese and Hawaiian Irish studies scholars, and one of them stood up to me and said about my novel, City of Bohan, I noted your use of medieval Elizabethan garrison talk in the novel, and I said, I'm really glad you spotted that. A lot of this stuff is news to writers when you hear about it after the fact. You know, when the work comes out, you're conscious of certain things and motifs, but it only often becomes clear down the line to you a few years on, well, what the story was about or where it's coming from. I mean, so much of my work comes from speech and from talk and from Irish talk and West of Ireland talk, and Irish people like to talk and we're quite good at it. But I think an awful lot of my work comes from, in Ireland you have all this talk and conversation going along like that, this banter and this babble, but it's what's going along underneath, the kind of undercurrents, and what's not being said. And so many of my stories come from there, you know. And there's one quote I always remember really striking home at me, and it was Norman Mailer said about, whenever two men say hello to each other on the street, one of them loses. And I think he could very specifically have been talking about Irish men, and it's those kind of things I'm always listening for and trying to make stories from.
Yeah.
The thing with a short story is you haven't much time to get it going and to make it alive on the page. And for me, very often, a story kind of takes flight and gets its wings when the people start talking to each other and when I can't quite shut them up and I don't know what they're going to say next. But we were talking a little earlier on about accents, and accents are so important to my work. I lived in Scotland actually for more than 4 years, and I've never tried to set a single word of fiction there because the accents, were impenetrable to me and I couldn't work with that. Then I lived in Liverpool for just much less time, a couple of years, and have written lots of stories there because to an Irish ear, that Lancashire speech is a very close first cousin, and I had a way in. Can't write south of England, So, and the peculiar thing about accents in Ireland, I always think if you can get the accent, you get the soul of the characters, But they change so quickly as you go around. And where I live now in County Sligo, I call it the land of the pregnant pause, because they say so little and there are these big gaps, and you have to listen to the silences as well. And again, what's not been said.
Yeah, I think that for me, the story is all about the voice. It's really that's once I've got the voice of a character, I've got the story up and running, and then I've got to listen for if there's any false notes in the voice. If I try and give the character something to say that might sound kind of pretty or lyrical, but that character wouldn't actually use those words, then I have to be ruthless and I have to get rid of that. So I really listen to, because what I'm trying to do is create authentic voices of people that feel like they're just speaking to you straight from there, and so as you're not even necessarily aware that that somebody sat there making them up. I want to get that kind of real authenticity, and so that means just really listening to the. I read them out loud to myself, and sometimes I always physically imagine them. I start by physically imagining their actual bodies and how they move and what they do with their physical bodies. So in that way, being a writer is kind of similar to being an actor. In that way, you're kind of literally inhabiting. You're putting on the shoes of this person. You're sitting the way that they sit, and you're most importantly talking the way they talk. And I think that repetitions are really important then as well. You're looking for different, because I grew up with my mum who's kind of a wonderful storyteller, but used a lot of repetitions in her stories all the time. She'd say, "I'm not hungry, Jackie, but I'm hungry. I'm not tired, but I'm tired." so you get into just an ordinary speech. There's a kind of a poetry and a rhythm to it, which I always find really fascinating. So I love, whenever I am, I really like listening to how people speak, to what expressions they return to again and again, because each one of us have got little comfort expressions, core expressions that we return to without even sometimes realising what we're doing. They're kind of our base expressions. So I'm interested in that, what our palette is as people, and also what the inner voice is, as Kevin was talking about, because we've got our out loud talking voice. We've all of us got these inner voices that can sometimes be a complete contradiction to the outer voice. So I really like trying
They're often saying, "Don't say that."
I know they're often saying, "Don't say that," or exactly. Yeah. So I like that mix of the two voices. And your stories had a real sense of that inner voice, because that second story you got a real sense of the man's inner voice. That was more completely told from his inner point of view rather than his outer.
Yeah, and I think as well, I mean, when I get towards what feels like a final draft of a story, that the most important and critical bit for me is then to act it all out and do it aloud, because I always think that you get the false notes in a story so much more quickly with the ear than you'll get them with the eye on the page. You immediately get them with the ear going, "Oh, he wouldn't say that," or "he wouldn't think that," or "she wouldn't do that." So it's for me that my most critical tool as a writer is the ear. And of course, eavesdropping is a very fundamental part of my business as well. So be very careful what you talk about when we're about.
Yes, all writers are great eavesdroppers. Oh, there's a question up there. Oh, I'm glad I wore my scarf.
My question is just for Kevin. Can you hear me? Yeah. My question is just for Kevin, and what I was interested in with your the extract with the fellas in the bar, and you can probably tell from my accent as well, I'm Irish, and how that came across to me was when I was listening to that, I was going, that's exactly how it is. That's exactly what these men, they sit in the bar and they have these kind of conversations. And I was just wondering what you thought about the differences maybe in terms of when you read that to an English audience or maybe an international audience vis-a-vis, an Irish audience? Because I don't know, was that the reaction of everybody else in the room, or maybe it was, or did it seem exotic or exaggerated? I don't know. I was just interested in what you thought.
I don't worry about the accent. I'm a very firm believer in the old truism that the local is universal, and that people will get that. And there are those people in every bar on the planet, you know. That story itself, that came out of eavesdropping. I live in County Sligo, but I go out on my bike in the summer, and I was out on the fjord of Killary on a very wet bank holiday Monday night, and I happened to be in an old hotel, and I happened to be in the lounge bar, and the locals were slumped on the bar, and they just started off on this stuff, and they were talking about roads and directions and mileage and all of this, and sometimes, you know, you always have the notebook, and what amazes me is how I make lots of notes all the time, but I very rarely get anything out of the notebook. But I got lucky, and I just made a note. What if the waters kept rising? I looked outside, and I knew it was this kind of apocalyptic story then, you know, that nature was out of whack. But my twist was it was an apocalypse as it would be viewed from an Irish hotel bar. How would they react, you know? And they just started drinking quicker. But really,
what was brilliant about it.
But that's the story on the surface. Really, it's the story. Actually, all those people at the bar who the narrator is kind of looking down on in a kind of sniffy way. He's this kind of poet from Dublin, but they're all much more comfortable in their skins, I feel, than he is in his. And as the story goes on, it's really about him growing up, I think. And I wouldn't have known this at the time. I was just having great fun doing all the voices. But after a while, it struck me that it was about this guy actually growing up a bit finally, and being out in that place kind of helped him do so, you know.
I kept thinking of all the Irish poets I know that it could be. I'll have to ask you after. Matthew Sweeney, no, sorry.
Okay, so we have time for one last question over here. Okay, don't worry, we're getting a mic to you. I can talk. Yeah, but no one here at the back. You can talk. Thank you very much.
I'm just always fascinated by which writers admire. And I'd love it if you told us which short story writers you most admire.
Well, it's in the short story form. There are so many different short story writers I admire. I admire the master, Chekhov, who I think is absolutely wonderful, and I keep returning to him again and again and again, just because every time I return to him, I get something different from a Chekhov story, and there's something that he understands about human nature. You know, he never, for instance, travelled first class. He would always travel. He said, if you're a writer, never travel first class. Always travel in ordinary class for the eavesdropping thing. And he was a doctor as well as a writer. And so he'd say that the doctor was his steady wife, and writing was his mistress. And I really like that about Chekhov. I like Raymond Carver. I like Flannery O'Connor. I love Ali Smith. I like the stories of Helen Simpson. I love the stories of an American writer called Dorothy Allison. I don't know if you know her, who wrote a book called Bastard Out of Carolina, which is just a fantastic, really, really fantastic book. I like a Nigerian writer called Isi Osondo, who's just been published recently, and he's fantastic. So I really like reading classics. I like Tolstoy, but also looking for contemporary writers and looking really to see what they're doing with the voice. In Scotland, I like the James Kelman as a short story writer. I like his short fiction better than his long fiction. You know, and there's lots of really fine Irish short story writers. So there's an Alice Munro, probably. I couldn't leave her out. She's probably one of my all-time favourite short story writers, because she just captures what the short story can do so brilliantly well, which is to take a small town and give the whole town a personality, so that town becomes a character and you become completely involved. And she's also very good at what Kevin was talking about earlier, and what's under the surface and what people aren't able to say. God, I could go on and on with different, but I'll probably stop there. But yeah, I think it's a great form though, because it can be dark and troubling, and it can afford to be dark and troubling, and it puts you. It's almost like the short story holds up a window to the soul, and it allows you to look right in there in the way that I think few forms can do, in that exact way that the short story does it. So I think it's an amazing form. And you have to just read. I mean, you have to read if you're going to write. You have to read and read and read and read, because it's like opposite ends of the same coin, writer and reader. Toss up the coin, and one side writer, and the other side reader.
Yeah, I think a short story, when it's at its best, can be such an intense experience, even more intense than a novel can be. And you find you have to sit up straighter in the chair and open the window to get some air in the room and turn the radio down a bit, you know, and you're in that moment. And many of the writers that Jackie mentioned there would do that for me. Chekhov, I think the mark of a great writer is when you read him at different ages and he means very different things to you. I would have read his stories in my early 20s and thought, yeah, these are very impressive, and not quite getting it. Reading them at 30, very different. Reading them at 40, very different again, you know. I'd mention a wonderful American story writer called George Saunders, and to name an Irishman, William Trevor, who writes with great facility about both Ireland and England, and the strange interdependency of our two islands, and the kind of love-hate. And I've always had a great affinity and love of V.S. Pritchett, the late V.S. Pritchett, because I think I sense a kind of a kindred spirit in the way that he approaches the story form, because he works off the ear, and he works from mad human talk and the wonderful, strange, crazy shapes that we pull and twist the English language into. And his reputation has faded slightly since his death, but I think in the long run he's in no danger. He'll come back, and he's a very great story writer. If I had to name one book of short stories, it would be the collected Pritchett stories to buy.
Good choices. Great. It's been lovely.
It's been great. Thanks, Jackie.
Well, thank you both very much. Thank you for giving us such a wonderful reading list as well.
Did you have your pen and paper out?
I think we probably recorded it. I don't think any of that's lost. Some of the writers that you mentioned have, of course, been to Small Wonder. But most of all, I'd like to thank you both for setting Small Wonder in motion in such an absolutely classy way with your fantastic stories, and also for the interaction and the questions that you've answered and the conversation between you, all of which has been extremely enlightening. Now, we're not going to let you get away right away, because we'll take you to the bookstall at the back, give you a drink, and people can find out what happened to those stories that you only got a glimpse of.
And especially the pages that she skipped over, I think, are going to be very interesting.
Such a tease.
Well, we may all be uprooted. Yes.
Steamy pages in reality, they do actually exist. You can find out what happened as far as the diet was concerned. Also, you can read Kevin's prize-winning story, Beer Trip to Llandudno, which he didn't want to read tonight because it's written in Liverpool accents, which he did mention that he does feel that he can conjure. So I'd like to thank Jackie and Kevin, to ask you to remain seated for a minute while we take them to the back, and then come and join us for a drink. Thank you very much.
Thank you.